Mr. Case, your first person you'd like to speak.
Dr. Frank, please.
All right, sir, if you can come on up here to the lectern and state your name, spell your last.
Say again, please.
State your name, spell your last.
My name is Doug Frank, Douglas G. Frank. My last name, F-R-A-N-K.
What would you like to share with me?
I'm the person during the trial that was referred to as Dr. Frank. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to the court today. Thank you for this. Since first meeting Clerk Peters in April 2021, I've interacted with her on dozens of occasions, both remotely and in person. I've observed her behavior in a variety of situations, and she's always behaved with the utmost integrity. I've been investigating election fraud for almost 4 years now in 48 states, and have met in person with hundreds of election officials. When confronted with systemic problems and fraud in their elections, most officials panic. They are afraid to speak up or ask difficult questions of their state officials. They say, "I don't want to be Tina Petered. I have a family to feed." But not Tina. Faced with life and career-threatening decisions, and despite great personal fear on her part, she has stood. As far as I'm concerned, she's not only a Gold Star mom, but a Gold Star patriot. No one is paying me to do this. I bought my own plane tickets and paid for my own hotel room. I'm proud to call Tina my friend and stand beside her during this ordeal. During the trial, I was described as the math teacher from Ohio. There's nothing wrong with being a math teacher, but more accurately, I'm a PhD physicist with 60 scientific peer-reviewed publications. In 1990, I was nominated for a Nobel Prize in Chemistry for a breakthrough discovery that was featured on the leading journals in the world in science. 1996, I helped establish a school for extraordinarily gifted youngsters in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I served as the math and science chairman for over 20 years. These are amazing students. If you put 10,000 kids in a room, only one of them would have an IQ like the kids we have at our school. I've also been designing electronics and writing software and computer programming since I was a teenager. I'm one of the first 300 people on the internet. I'm no stranger to math, science, and technology. I've been mathematically modeling elections since the 80s. So when I was asked by members of the Pennsylvania State Legislature to investigate their election, I was able to reverse engineer the algorithms that were being used to manipulate our elections. It was this work that caught the attention of Mr. Lindell, who made a documentary movie about my work called Scientific Proof. It was during the filming of that documentary that I met Conan Hayes, the hacker that was referred to during this trial. I also became good friends with him and Kurt Olson during that time. During the trial, I was surprised to learn that there were recordings made of my first meeting with Clerk Peters. I didn't know about that in April of 2021. Unfortunately, only the shorter recording was played during the trial. If the jury had been allowed to listen to the longer recording, they would have heard exculpatory evidence that at all times Clerk Peters was concerned about transparency, integrity, and following the law. She was asking us to bring her the evidence that we were gathering so that she and her staff could investigate it. There was no discussion of personal fame or plane rides, rather concern on Peters' part regarding reprisals from the State County Clerk Association and the Secretary of State. In fact, I was present at the meeting many months later, just prior to the cyber symposium, when it was decided that we would send Mr. Lindell's plane to retrieve Clerk Peters. Until then, she wasn't even going to be an attendee. It was someone else who exposed the fact that there were forensic images made of her systems, not her. And the tiny bit of information that was publicly exposed was blurred and unrecognizable by anyone except someone from the Secretary of State's office. There was no harm done. In other words, if the Secretary of State's office had said nothing, most people had never even heard of Tina Peters, and she would not have been thrust against her own intentions into the limelight, and we would not be here today. But instead, the Secretary of State panicked. The whole notion for my recorded phrase, "it would be a feather in your cap," was also misconstrued by the prosecution during the trial. Across the country, election officials are understandably concerned because the public...
Dr. Frank, you're suggesting that we're here today because of what the Secretary of State did?
Yes.
And not because Ms. Peters took the video in the first place and gave it to someone who then put it on the internet? That's your suggestion? You can go on. I don't need an answer.
Right. Across the country, election officials are understandably concerned because the public has been blaming them for the election fraud that occurred in 2020. In the recording, I was heard assuring Clerk Peters and her staff that if they discovered any fraud in their elections, and if they made it public, it would actually make them look good. They would be doing their jobs exceptionally well. Instead of blaming the election officials, it would be seen by the public as a feather in their cap. Clerk Peters already had sufficient evidence to be concerned. She knew about the laws about preservation of election data, and she had an official directive from the Secretary of State to perform the necessary backups. She knew that she needed to preserve the election data for further investigation, but her own IT department refused to do the backups. And when she sought a local IT professional to do them, he was not able to obtain the necessary equipment in time. Clerk Peters was out of time. The trusted build was imminent. So she called me for help. I connected her to a world-class, federally licensed white hat hacker that I had just met. He agreed to help on short notice to preserve her data and to observe the update, but on condition of anonymity because of the critical nature of his federal work. Clerk Peters even verified his credentials and checked with state officials to make sure that he was permitted to be president. This demonstrates that at all times...
What state official? What state official did she communicate with?
She testified that she contacted the Secretary of State's office to find out how many people and who could be present at the update.
No. You said she spoke to a state official that said he could be present, and I'm wondering who that was.
I don't recall that from the trial, but I remember her saying that she called the office.
She didn't testify at trial.
Well, who was it?
I thought that is something she said to you, and I'm wondering who that was.
No, she didn't say. I listened to the trial.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry. So, good question. Good clarification. Let's see here. Let's see what okay, here, yes. But Clerk Peters did verify his credentials, I'm aware of that, and checked with state officials, and that's what we just talked about, to make sure that he was permitted to be present. I remember the discussion about 2 people could be present during the build. It was that part of the testimony. Okay. This demonstrates that at all times, Clerk Peter was striving to be law-abiding. I've since helped to arrange election systems evaluations and penetration testing in several states. This is ongoing. It is important to understand that during such evaluations, one does not inform the staff of what and when certain things are going to happen. You know, what's the sense of announcing that you're about to do a security test to everybody? No, the idea is to test the security of the system without people knowing you're about to do that. Thus, this is not a conspiracy. This is standard practice. Banks, businesses, government institutions perform these sorts of cybersecurity evaluations all the time. For example, soon after my meeting with Clerk Peters in April 2021, I helped to arrange a similar evaluation in Lake County, Ohio. Look it up. When the results were presented to the Ohio Secretary of State, he also panicked and called the FBI. After the FBI investigation, there were no charges made because nothing illegal happened. Just like in Clerk Peters' situation, a federally licensed white hat hacker was asked by county officials to help evaluate their election systems. And both evaluations exposed the fact that their systems were out of compliance with federal standards. In the state of Missouri, their new 22 election laws require such testing on a regular basis. This shows that Tina Peters was not only behaving responsibly, but was actually ahead of the curve in terms of election integrity and security. Because I've been involved in this situation from the very outset, and during many critical points in the way, I am uniquely qualified to evaluate Clerk Peters' state of mind and intentions. I've also seen her courageous behavior during simultaneous, amazingly stressful life events. Some, I believe, are deliberately exacerbated by government officials trying to make an example out of her in order to intimidate all election officials around the country into unquestioning compliance. Tina Peters is no conspirator. Tina Peters is a patriot. Tina Peters is law-abiding. Tina Peters is not a threat to anyone except perhaps some government officials who have something to hide. It boggles my mind and shames our country that a Gold Star mom has had to endure this ordeal. She should not have to endure one more minute of this tyranny. As Jefferson said, when the people are afraid of the government, there's tyranny. When the government is afraid of the people, there's liberty. I implore the court today, restore Tina Peters' God-given liberty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. Mr. Case.
Alex Schroeder, please.
All right, Mr. Schroeder, come on up.